God knows where.
Yeah.
And it's about my father. I find it sad to sing it now a little bit because it's so close to home. But, you know, he was a horse trader really from Iowa who moved west and bought race horses. And we had a Cadillac every year, you know. And he drove us, or he flew us, no, we took a train back when they had good trains to Detroit to buy a Cadillac off the assembly line. It was big fins, you know, whatever year it was. Man, those were cars. My wife says, we got to get a new car pretty soon. To me, they all look like a rolling shoe now. I don't know a GMC from a Chevy, but back then they were all had very distinctive, and you felt safe. But he put us in the back of the Cadillac and drove through his hometown in Iowa, commanding that we wave up and down the street. And the newspaper said, biggest one-car parade in the history of Iowa. But he was a good man, throwing horseshoes at the moon. My father was a gambler, he threw horseshoes at the moon. He won $1 million, he lost $1 million too. They repossessed the house, they towed the Cadillacs. My daddy, he just smiled and said, one day I'll win it back. My daddy bought that Cadillac off a Detroit motor line, and then he drove it through his hometown to prove he'd hit his prime. With $100 bills in his St. Chris money clip, and 4 kids staring proudly from that big old sinking ship, throwing horseshoes at the moon. Boys, that's mighty risky odds. Sometimes you hook the hanks of hell, the backseat hands of God. Sometimes you hook what? I was trying to remember that line. I learned it just for you. Sometimes you hook the Milky Way or the outstretched hands of God. Thank you, Craig. But mostly they just fall to earth with a dark and a dusty hole, and the sound of falling horseshoes pulls upon your soul, throwing horseshoes at the moon. My father was a gambler, but he had an honest heart. He never did complain when the whole thing fell apart. He just swam a sea of alcohol till he hit the other side. How can you be a loser when you never lose your pride? Throwing horseshoes at the moon. Boys, that's mighty risky odds. Sometimes you hook the Milky Way or the outstretched hands of God, but mostly they just fall to earth in a dark and a dusty hole, and the sound of falling horseshoes will pull upon your soul, throwing horseshoes at the moon. Throwing horseshoes at the moon. Thank you, Craig, for the help there. I'm sure it'll end up on YouTube.